Minnesota Republicans have a cancer in our midst, a toxic ailment that is preventing us from taking full advantage of the historic opportunity that President Donald Trump's 2024 victory has provided for Minnesotans to make a reformational difference in our state in 2026. That cancer is an organization which works to infiltrate our party with bad faith actors who are not committed to our party's mission, a mission expressed clearly in our state party constitution. That mission is to implement the principles of our party by organizing at all levels to elect Republicans. That's why we exist. It should go without saying, but the Republican Party exists to elect Republicans. That's why we're here. That's our purpose. And everyone who shows up to our precinct caucuses signs on to that mission when they sign in to participate. But this outside organization that we're going to talk about today has a different mission that doesn't align with the party's objective. They exist for their own sake, to build their own organization at the expense of Republican victory. And something happened this week that proves that fact beyond any shred of reasonable doubt. Grab something to drink, settle in, and let's dig deep into this threat to conservative victory in Minnesota. Minnesota House Republicans currently have a one-seat majority, 67 members holding the line against 66 Democrats, with one seat yet to be determined in a special election. Under those circumstances, in order to keep the Democrats from effectively restoring their trifecta from last term, every single one of us has to stick together as a team. House Democrats know this, which is why they are eager to look for any opportunity to drive a wedge in our caucus. But Democrats aren't the only ones looking to sow discord amongst the House Republican team. Action for Liberty, a self-described grassroots conservative organization that actually works to undermine the will of the real grassroots activists who work to elect the current House Republican majority, also wants to see our team split. They've been working relentlessly since the election in November to set House Republicans up for failure in this legislative session. Leading up to the January 14th start date, A4L encouraged our members to withhold votes for Speaker Lisa Demuth in order to demand specific policy commitments that she was in no position to promise. The Speaker is powerful, to be sure, but she only has one vote. She can't compel other members to vote for a particular policy. So the idea that you could secure ultra-conservative outcomes like pre-COVID spending levels or any other specific changes to policy by holding the vote for Speaker hostage is categorically absurd. If you were to pull aside former Democrat Speaker Melissa Hortman, loop her up with Wonder Woman's lasso of truth, and compel her to answer whether a Speaker of the House can, through sheer force of will, just make people vote a certain way, she'd be the first to tell you that managing a caucus is like riding a bull. Leadership involves persuasion and relationship, not force. But unserious expectations are the bread and butter of a group like Action for Liberty. It's their stock in trade. And that's not by accident. As an activist, prior to being elected as a state representative, I personally attended Action for Liberty trainings on 3 occasions over the course of 15 years. Those trainings were based on materials provided by a national organization called the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership, or FACL. FACL trainings are attractive to disgruntled conservative activists because, like any cult, they present a sense of esoteric knowledge into the way things really work. They offer a secret path to power for people who feel powerless. They call it the real nature of politics. But their so-called real nature of politics training starts by promoting the idea that only 1 to 3% of the electorate actually matters, and everyone else can be ignored.
You see these guys over here? They're voting Team R. Doesn't matter who the candidate is, doesn't matter what the issues are, they're voting Team R. These guys over here, what are they doing? Team D, baby. And because it's true in a lot of places, and it's my illustration, we're going to give 8% to these guys, and we're going to give 8% to these guys. And then I'm going to knock off 2% because they're voting Libertarian Party, Natural Law Party, Constitution Party, or other knucklehead parties. You know, Free Dope Party. Oh, that's the Libertarian Party, sorry. And so you end up with 6% that are what we in the campaign trade call in play. That's who's going to decide the election. So what do you need to win? 3% plus 1. That's not that many people, man. And in a state house race, there's not a person in this room that couldn't influence that, and therefore be a threat to a politician. You want to know how to be feared in politics? Start threatening that. And remember, this was a 60% turnout. If turnout's only 40%, your 6 becomes 4, your 3 becomes 2. Turnout is 20%, your 6 becomes 2, your 3 becomes 1%.
Now, if this were true, which it's not, consider the obvious immorality of this approach to viewing the electorate. What they're saying, in essence, is that voters are nothing more than a path to power. What voters actually think doesn't matter at all. What voters deserve, what they're entitled to as human beings and citizens, all of that is completely irrelevant. The only thing that matters is whether they can help you obtain power to act in a potentially unpopular way.
They already got what they want. They're elected. All they got to do now, don't screw it up. How do you screw it up? Oh, start making a whole bunch of your constituents mad by taking strong stands on ideological issues that they don't like.
Sound familiar? Well, it should, because that's exactly the way modern Democrats operate. That's why, for instance, they take the radical minority position on something like boys playing in girls' sports, because they don't care what you think. As a voter, you're just a commodity to be used and manipulated for their benefit. And that's exactly what FACL teaches and exactly what Action for Liberty implements here in Minnesota. Their methodology is something called confrontational politics. The idea is that politicians don't respond to reason or moral arguments and can only be compelled to act by threats of pain.
Let's talk about the two stimuli that politicians respond to. Well, they are, just like in Pavlov's experiments, they are pleasure and pain. How do you react to the possibility of putting your fingers in a car door and slamming it? You avoid that, thank you. Took some of you a while to think that one through.
This is the philosophy being taught to grassroots activists. Rather than persuasion, rather than coalition building, their method is simple: attack, divide, and destroy. They don't care about winning elections. They don't care about passing conservative policies. They care about wielding power through division and chaos for its own sake. Here in Minnesota, we've seen this playbook firsthand. Action for Liberty, as one of the most vocal adherents to this FACL doctrine, spends more time attacking Republicans than fighting Democrats. This past week, that came into crystal clear focus when the interests of A. Farrell aligned with the actions of Minnesota House Democrat floor leader Jamie Long. Now, ever since the pandemic, Minnesota conservatives have justly hungered for action to rein in the emergency powers of Governor Tim Walz. Seizing on that hunger, Action for Liberty, working with then Representative Eric Mortensen, who, since losing his seat to Democrat Brad Tapke, now serves as the president of Action for Liberty, authored what they call the Never Again Bill. Now, the spirit of the Never Again Bill is 100% dead on. The idea is to prevent any future governor from doing what Walz did, from declaring a peacetime emergency and unilaterally declaring that we can't live our lives, that our kids can't go to school, that we can't operate our businesses, that we can't visit our dying loved ones, that we can't attend church. All while the liquor stores and big box stores and the governor's personal friends remain open for business. The problem with the bill is in the particulars of its solution. It's too broad. It may, in fact, be unconstitutional. Now, I knew this when I carried the bill last biennium, and I accepted the fact that it would need to be heavily amended through the committee process if it were ever to become law. But I never got that opportunity because I was serving in the minority under a Democrat trifecta, and the Democrats were never going to hear a Republican bill to limit Democrat power. This year, however, Republicans hold the gavels. And so the opportunity exists to advance an effective solution to the problem. And that solution came to the House floor this week in the form of HF 21, authored by Representative Kristen Robbins, a bill which would require a supermajority vote after 14 days for any declared emergency to continue. Imagine, had this bill been law in 2020, we truly would have had 15 days to slow the spread, rather than the 18 months that Tim Walz kept us under lock and key. It's an obvious solution to the problem, which addresses all the concerns Minnesotans have about how the pandemic was handled by Tim Walz. But it's not the Eric Mortensen bill authored during his single term in the legislature. And since the standard of his organization, Action for Liberty, is not victory, but inflicting pain on Republicans for pain's sake, Robbins' bill isn't good enough. See, the game that Action for Liberty is playing here is that they want to move the goalpost 10 yards out of bounds and then claim anyone who doesn't go along with that isn't a real conservative. That way, they can fundraise off of the manufactured outrage, regardless of legislative outcomes, and perpetuate their own existence as an organization and their own financial well-being as individuals. In order to do that, what they want, and what the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership prescribes, is what they call legislative champions. An A4L legislative champion is someone who is willing to portray their caucus by using the parliamentary process to secure roll call votes, which enable A4L to campaign against Republicans. So, for instance, when Eric Mortensen, the current A4L chair or president, was a member of the legislature, he would attempt to bring amendments to bills on the House floor in order to get Republicans on the record voting against something A4L could then market against House Republicans. He wasn't actually trying to get something passed. He wasn't legislating. He was just abusing the legislative process to build his own personal brand and to help his friend, A4L founder Jake Duesenberg, make more money from duped conservative activists. But it's 2025 now, and Eric Mortensen isn't a member of the House of Representatives, not since he lost in disgrace to Brad Tapke in 2022. So A4L hasn't had a champion to play parliamentary games on the House floor since then. They hoped I would be that guy when I was elected in 2022, and to be frank, I was open to it, but only if I came to the independent conclusion that their methodology was the best way to actually achieve conservative results. But after learning how the legislative process actually works, I came to the conclusion that their methodology only works to pad their pockets. It doesn't get bills passed. It doesn't deliver for Minnesotans. So this year, with a new crop of freshman House Republicans newly elected, A4L is looking for their new champion, someone who is willing to betray the rest of us in exchange for being lauded by an ineffective minority of activists for being the only real conservative. But they haven't had much luck on that front. We certainly have ideological disagreements within the House Republican caucus, any group of people does. But to date, we have not had a single member who has been willing to sabotage our team to make themselves look better than the rest of us, which is exactly what A4L demands. So in the absence of a Judas in the House Republican caucus, who has A4L turned to? You'll love this. Their new legislative champion, their new hero, is House Democrat Floor Leader Jamie Long.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Long, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Altendorf had referred to House File 21, the underlying bill, as the Never Again bill twice. But unless I'm mistaken, the amendment that I am authoring is the Never Again Act, which is House File 26. And let me state up front, this is not my idea. This was introduced by Representative Roach, which with co-authors from Speaker Dameth, Representative Niska, Representative Nash, and others. And we've seen a lot of bills that have skipped committee stops this session on a fast track to come to the floor. We saw House File 14 skipped Government Ops and Ways and Means. House File 20 skipped State Government and Ways. House File 12 skipped Judiciary. But unfortunately, the Never Again Act has been referred to the Veterans Committee and laid over on its path to the floor. So my intent on offering this today is simply to give members a choice between two very different approaches, I guess the Never Again bill and the Never Again Act. And they take very different tacks on emergency declarations. To be clear, I plan to vote no on this amendment. I support current law. But I did want House File 26 to have the opportunity to not be laid over indefinitely and never again be seen on the floor. So I ask members for a no vote.
Now you have to ask yourself, what is Jamie Long doing here? He admits openly that he has no desire to see the Mortensen-authored Never Again bill enacted into law, so why is he bringing it as an amendment to the Kristen Robbins bill? What does he get out of it? Who benefits? Well, the answer should be obvious to any thinking person. Long's intention with this stunt was to divide the Republican caucus, and specifically to isolate the current author of the Mortensen bill from the rest of us. Doing so would effectively break the House Republican majority. We're 67 members against 66 Democrats. So if Long can successfully drive one of us to fight against the rest, the Democrat trifecta will effectively be restored. That's good for Democrats, and therefore good for Jamie Long. It's bad for Republicans, obviously. It would completely hobble our ability to advance conservative legislation. And if a 67-67 tie is restored after the special election on March 11th, it would put Democrats in a tremendous advantage if we were fighting amongst ourselves. This is obvious. You don't have to be some sort of political strategic genius to understand it. And yet, despite this obvious dynamic, and despite the clear threat it poses to any Minnesotan who has principles and values to the right of Tim Walz, Action for Liberty came out the same night with an affirmation of Long's action. This is a group that claims to be fighting for conservatives, yet they align with Democrats to weaken Republican efforts. If your so-called conservative strategy consistently helps the left, maybe it's time to rethink your strategy. Winning elections and advancing conservative policy takes more than rage tweeting and purity tests. It takes strategic discipline and unity. The only one who benefits from internal Republican warfare are the Democrats. Action for Liberty isn't here to build a stronger conservative movement. They're here to tear it apart from the inside. If you want to see Minnesota flip red, if you want conservative policies enacted, then it's time to reject these destructive tactics. It's time to cut out the cancer of Action for Liberty from the Republican Party of Minnesota. This recent alignment between A4L and Democrat Jamie Long should be the death knell for their toxic organization. No self-respecting Republican should want to be associated with them in any way. And I say this as someone who has been associated with them in the past. This isn't about judging activists for falling for what A4L has sold. I fell for it. I get it. It's attractive to think you have the inside track on the real nature of politics and can somehow coerce legislative outcomes without doing the hard work of persuasion and coalition building. But just like every other area of life, there are no shortcuts to political victory or legislative outcomes. Get-rich-quit schemes are a scam. Fad diets don't work. Believe me, I wish they did. But anything worth having takes hard work. And that's what Minnesota Republicans have to commit ourselves to. Hard work to elect legislative majorities and secure statewide wins as a team of happy warriors who deal with the texture of the battlefield as it exists, not as we would prefer it to be. And that's not compromise. That's humility. That's strategic wisdom. That's what works in every other area of our lives, our families, our businesses, our communities, and relationships. Demands are the currency of tyrants. Service is the currency of citizens. So let's serve each other and work toward electoral victories which will align our state of Minnesota with the national reformation currently being led by President Donald Trump. Come with us if you want to live. Take care.